The title is The Future of Trove. I want to talk to you more about things which are going to be coming to Trove soon. Very interesting to hear the comments on the storage panel and the database panel before that, because many of the things which we are planning to do in Trove are things which have already been mentioned. So I'm going to start by maybe talking a little bit about what Trove is. And you'll see a lot of things in this presentation which are forward-looking. Anybody who's been paying attention to the stock market understands that forward-looking things are not always things you can count on. These are the things we're going to be talking about at the mid-cycle in the next 3 days. And so if you have questions for me or for anybody else in the Trove community who's here, please feel free to corner us and tell us what you're interested in. So without further ado, what is Trove? And as many people have already mentioned, it is no longer the case that a company can have just one database. Most companies are going to have multiple databases. Some of them are going to be relational. Some of them are going to be non-relational. Trove is a common service which supports both relational and non-relational databases. Very important thing to keep in mind. Point of reference to Amazon, this is not RDS. This is RDS plus DynamoDB, and soon to have a lot of capabilities which you see in Redshift as well. We'll talk more about that. Relational and non-relational databases, and it gives you more than just provisioning. One very common question which I'm asked is, I can do everything which Trove does with Puppet, Chef, Ansible, whatever automation tool. Trove is a lot more than just provisioning. It gives you a complete management infrastructure for the entire duration of a database. And it's open source and it's extensible and it runs on OpenStack and all of that good stuff. So for those of you who are not familiar with the history of Trove, the project originally started with a bunch of people from HP and Rackspace, some of who are here today, and we're going to be talking to them in the afternoon as well. It was incubated through Havana, came out in Icehouse, and more recently, through the last 2 releases, Juno and Kilo, there's been a whole lot of new features which have come in there. In the previous session, somebody made the comment, I think it was, sorry, I'm not sure who it was, but towards the end. Trove is not the database. Trove is the framework within which other databases are run. There's support for a very large number of databases already. MySQL, Mongo, Cassandra, Couch, and so on were the database which came out in the first release in Icehouse. We've subsequently added other databases as well. Our friends at IBM added DB2 and CouchDB. HP added Vertica. We're adding other databases as well. Trove is the framework. It includes support for things like backup and restore, for clustering, for managing a large number of database instances at the same time. If you have a single database, one instance, it's probably doable that you can manage that database manually. When you have hundreds of databases and each one is a different kind of database, it becomes hard. So one of the things that Trove does is it makes that particular thing easy for you by giving you these frameworks, like for backup and restore. So when we came out in Icehouse, we had support for backup and restore, single instance data stores, and so on. Juno and Kilo have added support for clustering, have added support for replication, and we're continuing down that path. So, by the way, if you have questions anywhere along the way, let's make it interactive, right? Sorry, say that? Okay, great question. So the question from the first row was, is Hadoop supported? Trove does not itself support Hadoop. OpenStack has a project called Sahara, which is Hadoop as a service. There is a lot of interest in that particular area in the big data space. By the way, it's mandatory that any computer event must use the word big data some number of times. I have met my quota here. Big data, people kind of sort of want you to have this integration. There is now support for Vertica. Vertica is a parallel database. And there are a bunch of us who are thinking about how we can integrate more with Sahara. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, moving on. So to understand where the future of Trove is, you need to understand what our vision is. And there are some specific words here. Simple, intelligent, reliable, scalable provisioning. I'm going to talk about each of those words in detail in the next several slides. But the thing which I want you to think about is, this is the idea of, or this is the guiding principle which we have, which kind of drives what we're doing. I'll spend a little bit of time on single and multi-node data stores here and talk about the rest of them in the other slides. You can easily provision a single instance of MySQL. You can provision a single instance of Cassandra. Nobody in their right mind would run a production system on either of those. Databases are fundamentally more complex than that. You need more complex topologies. You need replicated systems, clustered systems, horizontally scalable systems. Those things are nightmares to operate. Anybody here manually tried to do this stuff before as a DBA? Show of hands. Not exactly the easiest thing. You can do it, yes. The trouble is if you happen to have a large number of these systems and you get just one little thing wrong. The objective of Trove is to automate all of those workflows so you don't have that one little error, okay? So what are some of the simple things about Trove? How many of you here have actually used Trove? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you use the CLI? API, Horizon? Okay. Everything in Trove is built on a single common RESTful API. Okay? Trove as a service, like every other OpenStack service, exposes a single REST API, and the CLI is built on top of that. The Horizon dashboard integration is built on top of that. Okay? And one of the important things is the second bullet on this slide, or a second bunch of bullets. Any organization has a large number of different kinds of databases. Let's assume you have Mongo, and you have MySQL, and you have Cassandra. For different applications, or I'm also required to use the word polyglot persistence. Gene? Yes? Okay. You have an application which uses multiple databases. When you want to provision databases, one of the good things which Trove gives you is the Trove RESTful API create will help you provision a MySQL database if you want one, or a Mongo instance, or a Cassandra instance. It's the same API call. And yet, Trove is going to be behind the covers handling all of the details of those databases. In a very similar way, if you want to provision a cluster of databases, you want to provision a Mongo cluster, it's the same Trove create call. The parameters are going to be different, but if tomorrow you wanted to provision a cluster with Percona XDB cluster, it's still going to be the same Trove create call. So that's the common abstraction, the simple abstraction which Trove kind of builds up for you. And to the point made in the last session, Trove is not the database. Trove does not get in the business of the data plane. Trove is not like DynamoDB in that regard. Trove is the framework around a bunch of databases, making the provisioning and lifecycle easier. Your application still talks directly to the database. In very, very specific cases, Trove does get into the data plane, backup and restore, for example, but your application talks directly to the database unmodified, okay? Questions? All right. Some of these things are things which Trove already has. Some of them are forward-looking. Trove is intelligent. For example, Trove should be able to leverage the capabilities of underlying storage. It was talked about in the storage panel a couple of minutes ago. Trove should be in a position to understand different kinds of backends and provision the appropriate one. If you want to use higher performance storage for a database, usually a good idea. Trove should have the capabilities to understand some of those things. If you're provisioning a database, which, as was pointed out, needs to be highly available, it's not really much use if you have both instances of the database sitting in the same rack, in the same failure zone. You want to have them in two different places. Trove should be able to leverage the underlying capabilities of Nova to do that. That's the direction in which we're heading. Rack affinity, the last bullet on that slide. Trove should be both reliable and scalable. So at the end of the day, you as a user should just you should be able to deal with databases as a common abstraction. And more importantly, you should not be able to do something stupid. This is unfortunately a place where we're continuously improving. The things which are listed here are things which maybe in previous releases would have been possible. There's new features which are going in, for example, to prevent you from launching a database of some kind on a flavor which is undersized. Ensure that the correct flavors or a restriction on the flavors on a per data store basis. Database A may require more memory than database B. Therefore, the approved set of flavors may be different on a per data store basis. And oh, by the way, the operator, the IT organization, should be able to configure those. And the last one here is having a single instance data store is no good. You need to have a scalable data store, which is horizontally scalable, but you also need scale up and scale down. Right now, the ability for you to resize an instance, resize storage exists. In the future, we're moving in the direction where Trove, as a backend database as a service, will automatically provision scale up and scale down as well. Not quite there, getting there. One of the important things about having a database is you've got to make sure that you know what's going on. You need to know soon when something is going bad. The ability for you to monitor a large number of databases is really important. One part of it, we've got integrations with Horizon. The management side of it, you can deal with it through Horizon. We're still working on things to deal with the monitoring side of it. At this point in time, there is integrations in some places with Ceilometer. We're working on having additional integrations with it. If anybody's interested in details like this, pull us aside. Especially, I'll point to Brad and say, pull him aside and ask him about it, because his folks have been doing some of the work on that. But an important area where we're trying to improve Trove, in Icehouse, you could provision a single instance of MySQL. In Juno and Kilo, we added the capability for you to do replication. In Juno, you could do replication. In Kilo, you could do MySQL GTID-based replication with MySQL 5.6. You can now do safe failovers with no data loss. The next step is for Trove to be able to say, we'll automate the failover under some set of rules. So this is an area where we're slowly building up to the point where Trove as a database as a service gives you a reliable backend data store, which you can configure the parameters under which the failover is actually going to happen. So we're slowly trying to get to that point. The last one I mentioned quickly, management. You have a large number of databases. It is really, really important that management be provided by Trove. And again, if you have one database, it's not a big deal. When you have, as any organization has, hundreds of instances running databases of different kinds, there are things which must be automated. There is no value in saying Trove provides backup and restore, but you have to do it manually. It's a step. Trove provides backup and restore today. We're working towards a framework where Trove is going to do automated backups. As an example, scheduled tasks, automated tasks, managing configuration parameters. This is something which is already there. How many of you have looked at the configuration files for an average database? MySQL configuration file can have hundreds of different parameters. If you have a large number of database instances, the ability for you to take a configuration profile and attach it to a large number of instances is extremely useful. Trove provides a capability called configuration groups where you do exactly that. You create a configuration profile, and then you can attach it to a large number of instances. Trove takes care of the details of how these variables or changes are actually applied on the instance. That capability is now being rolled out across more data stores. We're doing some of that in Liberty. A very, very important aspect of Trove is that the actual instance on which the database is running does not need shell access. The end user should not, in fact, have shell access to that instance. From a data security perspective, that's a good thing. However, there's a lot of things which a DBA needs to do, which do, in fact, on occasion, require access to log files. One of the things which you had to do in the past was, in order to get the log file, you need shell access. Trove now is working on a capability which will allow you to get the log files through an API, get the log files sent over to some Swift storage where you could look at them. You don't need shell access. That improves the security on the instance. Backup and restore, Version upgrades are things which are absolutely required in a production environment. We're working on those as well. So this is an indication of some of the things which we're doing to build on what we've already built in the past releases. Single instance data stores, a framework for things like backup and restore and clustering and replication. Now we're starting to fill that out with more support for configuration groups, more administrative capabilities, more management capabilities. And the last thing on this is data security. There are new projects in OpenStack like Barbican, which we're thinking about the integrations with. Barbican is the identity, the key store, I think, is a secure key store. And data security is in large part about encryption, but the other half of it, which is a hard problem, is key management. Barbican helps us with that. So looking ahead, Trove has support for a large number of databases already. The list includes MySQL, Percona, and MariaDB. It also includes Mongo, Cassandra, Couch, Redis, Postgres, Vertica. Am I missing anything? Anybody? What did I miss? I missed a bunch. I don't know what they are. But for each of these, there's a different set of capabilities which is available. And one of the things we're working on in Liberty, and we're going to be continuing to do this, is to build out a complete, is to fill out this matrix. Databases on one side, capabilities on the other, fill out the matrix. We're doing a bunch of that in Liberty. We're going to continue that. But an important area in order to go into production is integration with other systems, billing systems, other monitoring systems, eventing systems. We're of course doing work with Ceilometer. There's talk about doing stuff with Monasca, other projects, doing work with Barbican integration for key management and so on. So these are all specific projects and individual things which people are working on. At the end of the day, the objective of Trove is to make it easy for an organization to run databases in their cloud, private, public, offer it as a service, where the specific details about how you do complex database operations for each individual database are abstracted away from you. As was mentioned by other panelists earlier, you cannot scale a database organization by just saying, I'll hire more DBAs. That stuff has all got to be dealt with by Trove, where using Trove as a service is a whole lot easier and a whole lot quicker for an end user. That's effectively where Trove's headed at. I think that's probably the last slide I have, but it is the last slide I have. But there are a whole bunch of us here who are Trove contributors. The Trove community itself has probably about 15 companies at this point who are actively contributing code. If you're interested in speaking to any, quick show of hands. Anybody here who's an ATC in Trove, raise your hands. All right. Come on, there's more of you here. Don't be shy. Okay. So if you are looking for information about anything relative to Trove, find one of the people who did raise their hands and ask them what you want. Most importantly, because for the next 3 days, we're going to be in the mid-cycle where we're trying to figure out all the things we want to prioritize for the M release. The best ideas we get are customer ideas. So give us some of those. Thanks, Ken.